guidelines for internal and external communication to and from Board of Education. The only thing I want to lead into that, any suggestions or ideas that we can have to improve our communication, this is an opportune time for us to set up some suggestions as to how we can improve both the internal and external communication. So
Let me make a leading comment when it comes to board communication. There are 9 of you, and that's fine, but you have to be sensitive to the fact that there are 9. It is very inappropriate for a board, whatever size, to select 2 or 3 people with whom a board member is going to communicate and exclude the others. So anything that is to be discussed, to be shared, needs to be shared with the whole governance team. Sorry, that's 10 of you, because that includes the superintendent. So that's just something to start out with. The other thing is that it is appropriate to communicate by email, by text, etc. However, the board must remember that anything that you put in writing, if it's on a Post-it note, you must feel comfortable and confident about it, perhaps appearing on a billboard, because it is subject to the Open Records Act. And I point to the Post-it note based on personal experience. So you want to be very, very careful of that. In addition, your communication is among you, because as you mentioned, I think when we started out, no one board member has authority. It's until you function as a corporate body that anything can happen. But you want to make sure also that you are sensitive to your communication with your superintendent, because again, there are 9 of you. And the other thing to keep in mind is how you communicate with your legal counsel. And you have to be careful about that as well, such that you are not incurring, you're not being poor stewards of your money. So I just want you to consider.
That's what that discussion's in another
Okay,
day.
but that's just all of the things to consider.
Yeah, you gotta.
Mr. Orson was first.
Just I think a couple of initial observations. And the internal communications is big, a concern to me, which is it's hard, I think, in our formal meetings, retreats, or work sessions, or school board meetings, to always have a comprehensive conversation. We can have discussion, there may be a debate, but that's different than conversations. And so I think, well, very sensitive to, we always want to be careful on anything, right? But we have to avoid being too careful that we don't engage in a conversation that allows us to address a lot of things before we get to the meeting. Not because we're wanting to exclude the public, but because we may be able to reconcile some things or get some common understanding that it's harder to do because the time we have is short, the agenda is long, there's lots of things that are coming before us. And so I think it's important. And at a personal level, I've been frustrated. I know I'm a big email user. That's one of my downsides. But I think, but so is Thad. Hey, and Thad sends longer emails. I'm just pointing that out. Thad sends much longer emails than I do. I send more. He sends longer. Right. He has attachments. I don't send attachments because I can't get first class to attach anything. So, but I do think it's a vehicle for us to begin to have conversation and ultimately, obviously, recognize it is something. Nothing I'm trying to put in there is I wouldn't want the public to hear. I just think it's one tool we have that we don't always utilize. I think in engaging in conversation because, for example, since we don't meet every day, which is a good thing. The old board met virtually every day. There was a called meeting literally 3 times.
64 meetings in like 80 days.
I mean, it was, and so, oh yeah, almost every other
last
day.
year?
Yeah, it was, and so I think I think it's a way for us to engage because we may find there's consensus or if it's of interest, and to Zenda's point, to then respond to everybody. Because I think sometimes I know that I've sent some emails that you have said to me, oh, I've heard from other board members, but it wasn't respond all. And so now we're having the asymmetrical conversations, and those are, and there may be just because it was easier, and people do this all the time, they hit reply instead of reply all, and so. But the problem is that you think there's been no response, and there's no way to generate that dialogue and to see that there's some consensus about something. I'm talking, and some of these are, when I say administrative, I don't mean in terms of getting into the day-to-day business administration, but things that are not, don't rise to the level of an agenda item, but something that is worthy and appropriate for us having some thoughts on it. And I think there's just a more effective way for us to use that. If we had other tools, that would be great, but quite frankly, it's probably the best tool we have outside of always having a meeting. And so there are just some things I think we would be more productive if we could have some of those conversations and just see where people stand.
Mr. Coleman.
So a couple things I would highlight in terms of our communications that I think are going well, or areas where we might push a little further. First, I really like our current standard for material preparations for boards and the time we have to respond and to email our questions. And so far, we've left that informal. I think that's good. If we think we need to formalize that so that that doesn't go away with future boards, I think it's not just helpful to us, but frankly, boards having the time to really consider thoughtfully, if they so choose, the materials. I've found the past 5 or 6 months that we've been doing that really well, 10 days in advance, incredibly helpful. I know it was extra work for the staff, but hopefully it's worthwhile work. And I think it's made the meetings run a little better. It's allowed us to ask more intelligent questions. So A, I would encourage us to keep doing that. B, I would encourage us to at least think about whether there's any need to formalize that so that it stays beyond this current group of folks who are working well together. Because again, I think we have to think in terms not just of these people, but in terms of any people who sit in these seats and what standards we hope they hold.
Can I interrupt you just one moment, because you made a couple of points. You've indicated that something is working well from a management point of the board. This is a good opportunity for the superintendent staff to put a pin in that. Check. Is it working well? Is there something else that needs to be done so that you get some feedback?
That's great.
Yeah.
And I welcome feedback on that.
Oh, we appreciate it.
Okay.
And it helps to refine our own understanding of some of the issues, just because of the research. And it's been very helpful to us. And I think your suggestion to formalize the process is good.
So we can think about that. If the superintendent, we can talk about who should make that recommendation. Maybe it comes from staff, maybe it comes from others, in a way that's convenient for everyone, but kind of institutionalizes what I think is a good process.
And remember, it doesn't have to be a policy. It can be a procedure. Doesn't have to be a policy. It can be a procedure.
Written by the administration.
Yes.
Johnny Q.
Yeah.
Then no one will. The couple of quick things that I'd like to see us follow up on, where we're doing a good job most of the time, but maybe we can improve. One is with citizen comments. We were talking about this. I think it's great that the superintendent actually responds to all those citizen comments. I think that's a huge step forward. I've talked to other folks about this. I think us formalizing a way to make sure that we follow up where we are appropriate, that we actually have a chance to process, especially those concerns related to policy. So I think we all know that the citizen comments have a mix of things that are appropriate and inappropriate for the board to engage in, frankly. And there's, we have to decide between those. But on matters of policy where it's appropriate for us to engage, I think we can continue to evolve the way that we process those comments, and we make sure that we're addressing concerns that come up there that we feel appropriate. So I'd like to think through in some way, and I don't have the perfect answer now, a way in which we can improve the way we engage in the right things from citizen comments, if that makes sense. Third quick thing, recommendation. So in the sheets we get before the working sessions, I just like to 100% of the time make sure that all sheets include a recommendation. Because we've had a couple of instances this year where an issue was raised, but a recommendation from staff wasn't made. I would like 100% of the time a recommendation from staff to be included in the blue sheets or whatever color sheet it is, depending where it fits in the meeting. But does that make sense, so that we have the perspective of staff that 10 days in advance, so that we know what we're going to be voting on and how we can react to that? And that's just a consistent protocol I'd like to see implemented. And then on citizen concerns, one of the things I hope we're doing a little bit better is trying to, again, decide where we should get involved in individual citizen concerns and where we should not. because there are sometimes inappropriate ways for us to get involved. And a lot of times we refer that citizen to the appropriate person, or we refer those comments to the superintendent. I think the staff actually, the majority of the time, does a great job of letting us know they followed up and how they followed up. Again, I would just like to push, where possible, the staff to just let us know what's followed up, just so we have a little more transparency into that. I think 80% of the time I've, forwarded a citizen concern to folks, I've received follow-up that says, hey, we reached out, and here's what we're planning to do. I just like to see that done as consistently as possible, because I think that makes us more intelligent dealing with the community. And again, feedback from staff is welcome, but hopefully that would help us all get better.
Let me ask a
If there are
question
issues
about that,
where you feel like you may not have received the comment, just direct it back to me and I'll follow up.
Great.
If there's a comment or concern or inquiry, and if a reasonable amount of time expires and you've not heard anything, just refer it back to me and then I'll follow up with staff. That's
Mr.
simple.
Thurman, when you or your staff follow up, when you have responded to a citizen concern, and say you got it from me, you send it back to me, does all the board get it?
No.
It might be helpful for all the board to get the response, simply because, even if it didn't come from me that time, all
Similar
members of the board
requests.
could run into similar incidents and at least have a sense, and sometimes that helps too. Because the other thing is, you also don't want to get so divided in districts that it's my school, my principal, et cetera. So it belongs to all of us, and recognize that the same kinds of concerns can crop up anywhere. So that can be real helpful too.
Oh,
You
good
think?
idea.
That's a great.
You think so?
My perspective on our internal communications and external communications are based on theory and reality. I'll speak about internally, and I think we have improved our processes with the agenda items and board meetings in our timeline. We've adjusted it to expand the time frame. But something that has not been addressed, which has been a concern of mine, is that our availability, when do we individually as board members have time to work on our agenda items and do our research, and for me personally, with the kids and everything, weekends are tough. So that when we have this time frame of get it on Friday and respond by Monday or Tuesday, that really pushes me to a Monday evening to get everything done, exclusive of what I got personally, because weekends are family time. I would hope that we could maybe adjust it a little bit more to push it, and I've discussed it with Margaret, and it's be tough, and administratively, you let us know if we can. But I would suggest that we actually get our books like maybe on a Wednesday or Thursday prior to the weekend, so we could have a weeknight to work on it, if it's possible. Just because I know how valuable everybody's weekends are. And because weekdays for me are my work nights, and the put the kids down and I'll stay, and then weekend comes, it's daddy time, So that's my perspective on that. I'd also like to figure out, just like we were talking about communicating with everybody on the board when we send an email, I would like to have a discussion of expectations of responding to this. If someone asks, hey, I'd like everybody's opinion on this, and then it is, what's a reasonable expectation based on every individual's work schedules or personal schedules of what's a reasonable time frame for a response? I don't want to say, hey, 3 hours. Well, that's not reasonable. Is 3 days, students? And let's just have that discussion and figure out our own expectations, and then we can further down the road talk about external communications with stakeholders, administratively, how long should the administration take to respond to stuff. We all understand how busy our lives are, and sometimes I may need a little more time, but if it's just that expectation that, hey, I'll respond to you immediately, just to let you know, I can't respond. But I will in this time frame, just to kind of give that kind of clarity, because we're so busy, and that's my 2 cents right there.
As the board agrees on these kinds of things, you might also consider setting aside some kind of format where board expectations or whatever, however you want to call it, is aside like a job description, because it's not always going to be this board. If you come up with something that says the person is expected, first of all, to use email. You'd be surprised at the number of districts around the state where you got a board member or two sitting there that says, I don't do email. So those kinds of things may be a given to this group, but let it be written someplace so that it can guide the others. It might be some of the things that you're discussing here, okay? Dr. Moore?
Yeah, a couple of things. When we're looking at getting things in a timely manner, and Jim, I can respect, you're saying about your weekends, mine are great too, but during the week, by the time I finish, I have 4 email addresses that I have to check. And sometimes it makes it very difficult. By the time I look and I see 100 emails coming through, that I would like for us to be respectful of each other, that unless that person is involved and you need a response from me, and I don't need to be in a conversation between Dr. Johnson and Marshall back and forth these long emails, and then I have to decipher what's going on, and is it something that belongs to me or that I need to address? And so many times I get these long emails, and it's like, wow. Sometimes if you need a quick response, pick up the phone and call. I'm just not, I think that email depersonalizes things. Texting and emailing, I just don't have time. I'm in front of people during the day, so I'm not in front of a computer. So by the time I get to check my emails, it's evening time. And by the time I look at each one of the ones I have, I want to be cognizant of my time and respectful of my time also. So there are some people who believe in, like Dr. Bowie was saying, that all they want is email. I'm not one. I just don't have time for that all, be looking at emails all the time and checking. And I do work during the day. I do have things that I do. I work for myself, so I'm constantly doing things, and so I need that time to be respectful, be respected, getting things in a timely manner so that I can address. I don't have a problem with getting it on the weekend, because I'm gonna make the time whenever I can get it, but by the time I finish seeing people and working out their problems during the day, I don't wanna see another problem when I come home at night. I don't wanna deal with it. And so the weekend is probably when a Sunday afternoon or Saturday, when I am sitting around, that I can deal with that. I think that's very important. I think that we have to also begin to look at communicating information if we want something for an agenda. And I know a couple of times when there's been the day of the board meeting, someone comes in and want to explain about something they want you to vote on, or they want you to take a look at. And to me, that's just disrespectful of the board, but it's also disrespectful of me, and it seems to be a personal gain at that particular time. I need time to process, and I do my research. And even if I don't contact the superintendent, there are ways that I research, and I like to have that time to research so I can make an informed vote on something. So feeling rushed into making a vote on something because someone drops that on an agenda item at that particular day, or they needed to be voted or to be put out there, I just like to have more time to be able to process it so that I can make the best decision and the most informed decision. And the last thing is, I like to see how we are cordial to each other, because there are times we get together and we walk in and there's nothing wrong with speaking to each other. If we can't speak to each other, what are we going to say to the kids that are out there? I'm a speaker. I'm one that I don't have a problem. And not holding grudges, not holding on to things. This is business. We take care of it. I'm finished with it. I don't hold grudges. I don't get caught up in all of that. But there are times when some of us come in and we look at each other pass right by, and it's like, oh, are you invisible? There's something going on. So we're going to, be able to model for our children and for each other. We've got to start with ourselves and being able to say there's nothing wrong with speaking. Because once I've said what I've got to say, I'm finished. And you all know I'm going to say it the way it needs to be said, and I'm going to move on. But I don't hold that, and I think that it just bothers me. And then when we got in public, we want to speak to each other, hug each other and all that, and I'm going to hug you back and I'm going to speak, but it's like, okay, if you can't, treat me that way behind closed doors, then, when you come out in public, and so that bothers me. I think the way we treat each other, the first customers we have in trying to effect change with the customers that we're really working for, the students and the community and the parents and all that, is right here at this table. How do we engage with each other? How do we respect each other? I think that we have been a great group together I like everybody here, you know, as I said, I don't hold grudges, and, you know, I respect what everybody has to say, I have my opinion, everybody has theirs, and we respect it, but I think just speaking to each other and not pretending that one is not there, no matter what's going on, I just would like for us to look at that, because I think it sets the tone when you come into the room. I was taught, you know, you come in the room, you know, what was there, you speak. And you speak back, and it's a common courtesy. And so it's something, you know, as an educator, with little children, that's one of the things, you didn't speak, you know, you didn't say anything. And so I found that to be, you know, quite pervasive at times. And I'll come out to speak, and sometimes I said, oh, hi, you know, because, you know, it's not guarded to each other. So those are major things. And emails, I'm not an email person. You know, and I don't have a problem giving, but when I just see all these going through it, I'm trying to go through and look at it and figure out what's what, does it belong to me? If it doesn't belong to me, as I teach my clients, it's not my favorite color, it's not my gift, you know, I need to give it back. And I just really would appreciate it when we're doing those emails to see, does it belong to everybody? If you ask me for a response, I'm gonna give it to you, but it might not be that day. It might not be the next day because of the fact that it's just so many that are coming through.
Dr. Muller has said a lot.
Yes.
But I do want to go back to one thing that concerned me, and I'm sorry that I keep interjecting, but everybody has been through new board member orientation. And one of the things to remember that concerned me was what you made a comment about, if I understood correctly, about the agenda. Now, the agenda does belong to the board. The agenda is prepared in advance. There should be no surprises to the agenda. That is inappropriate for each other, for the superintendent. The superintendent is about the only one that ought to come up with something last minute, and that is based upon some extraneous event having occurred. But there needs to be a very specific procedure for board members that everybody understands. If I want something on the agenda, here's the process to go through, because no single board member has a right to have an item on the agenda. The other thing is, and I keep telling you I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to lean this way, but the law says that the agenda can be revised as it becomes necessary. Now that means that the board determines that it's necessary, but you better darn well be able to rationalize that necessity if the question should occur. And the thing to keep in mind is it does not take but one individual in the community who has an axe to grind with one individual on this board to create an issue where there does not need to be one. You all have enough to do. Did not have to worry about inappropriate items coming up on the agenda. And depending what it is, the community can determine that you're not being transparent. So I just had to get back onto that before we lost it, and I apologize for interrupting, but please keep that in mind. Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, that's a very good suggestion. In terms of communication, I'm very sensitive to requesting information, and I just would like the board to be sensitive. Now, one thing I want to make sure I'm perfectly clear on, if you need information to make a decision, you need to request that information. But oftentimes, it be very foggy in terms of, as I read some requests, it needs to be very clear and concise in terms of what the request is. And two, I would just like to communicate that don't just request information for information's sake, because it puts a tremendous strain on the staff. I've been on the other side many times, and board members just request information. I mean, packages of information, and that being time on task, so because somebody got to prepare that staff, prepare that response, someone. And the only thing I'm asking the board to do is to be very sensitive to what you're requesting, and certainly I'm not saying, I'm suggesting that you need the information to make a decision, then you should do that, but I just want to make sure that we're very sensitive.
Yes. I appreciate actually all of the input so far. Some of it feeds into what I would like to see with respect to communications. And I do think that this is sort of the framework that it probably involves resources to be able to help manage this. But broadly speaking, I think we need a communications plan. And I think that the plan needs to articulate the internal board communications, whether they include protocol and, which would include timeliness, if you will. I think it's also includes internal between the board and the administration. And I also think that it includes a component that is external, that includes the board to the public, and then information coming in from the public. And in that dimension, particularly as it relates to the external piece, I think there needs to be a public relations component to it. In other words, the message that we want to communicate to the public about what we're doing and why we're doing it. I think as an example, and this is just an example, it would be helpful to sort of have a quarterly letter from the board articulating why we made some of the decisions that we made, just for the benefit of having the public to understand. So I think we need to have that sort of dialogue with the public and encourage input. As it relates to the public, and then back into the reporting piece and the request for information, I think it would be helpful to format the public comments in a way that we can catalog them, whether they are policy related or administrative related, if it's bus schedule, if it's classroom stuff, if it's policy. And I would also encourage that in this age of electronics and the age of technology, that we could create a blog that would have keywords in it so that we can actually get public input on a daily basis if they'd like. And we can determine how we would manage our response to that information. But I think any opportunity that we can get to encourage the public to communicate what their concerns are and that we can group them, I think would be helpful. And I think technology will help us do that. With respect to the internal communications, I would like to see us set a time frame on when we request information and when we can get it. I would also like there to be a standard on when the agenda is set and that we define the extraordinary circumstances that would require something to be placed on the agenda at the last minute, if you will, so that we can process the information, so that we can get a better handle on the kind of questions that we need to ask prior to the meeting, if we can get those resolved, so that we don't have to have long conversations about the concerns that we have about particular agenda items. And one of the examples that comes to mind, for instance, is the transaction process. When I look at the transaction processes, which is 90% of what we vote on a monthly basis, those decisions, in my opinion, in my assessment really, have actually been made, some 90 days prior to us actually getting the document. Someone in the organization has decided this is what we're going to do. And they've taken at least 2 weeks and probably 30 days to craft an RFP that will be going out to the vendor community that says this is what we want to buy. There's going to be another 30 days or 2 weeks and 30 days that we will evaluate the responses, or that the responses will be allowed to come in. And then there's another 30 days in which, 2 weeks and 30 days, that we're evaluating those responses. So in terms of the efficacy or the reasonableness of an initiative, we know that in 90 days. But we wait until we've already made a decision, essentially, on the transaction, that we present all of that information to the board. So in addition to trying to understand whether or not this is appropriate, we're also obviously taking into consideration whether or not these are the dollar values. And I would like to think that we can begin to take steps that the initiative that we are going to embark on in a 12-month cycle should be defining the budget. That clearly there's some baseline number of what the budget is or should be to sort of maintain the operation of the system. But there are going to be some standard requests based on the incremental increase, or there are going to be a standard process by which they request this incremental increase to the budget. This seems to me could be put out, literally months in advance, so that we can have that conversation about what the reasonableness of it from our point of view, and then cast our votes regarding that. And then so that when we get to the actual transaction or actually authorizing the dollars to be spent, you know, it's just a matter of, it's a math conversation. And that can happen in, you know, 5 minutes per item. And so I'd like to see us do something around that.
Okay.
I would, if possible, I would like to clarify something.
Are you gonna make the clarification or
No,
you
I'm
asking?
asking for
Okay.
clarification.
You're next.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
I was trying to get the clarification in terms of operational requests. For instance, you made a suggestion that, for instance, the superintendent, if he wants to propose, buying computers, are you saying that, he should allow the board to give that board that information once he decides that he is desirous of putting on an RFP prior to bringing it to the board?
Right, it would be my expectation that the superintendent, and I'm not speaking specifically of this superintendent, I mean as a matter of practice, right? As a matter of practice, that the purchasing decisions about, you know, particularly major purchasing decisions that are going to either involve technologies or programs or organizational changes, whatever they will be factored into the budget decision process. And I'm saying when those items are presented in that discussion, I'm saying that is the time that I would like to see the board engage in the decision that's being made after the decision has been made that, yes, this is what we're going to do over this next 12 months, so that we can then vote on the merits of it earlier in the process, and then save the transactional conversation for when it's actually executed.
90 days later.
Right.
Ms. Bowie, I yield to you.
Okay, and I'm trying to understand also, because as the conversation started, we were talking about transaction, I didn't know
Correct.
what the heck that was.
That's the blue sheet.
And we need to be real careful, because you all may have some understanding about what you're talking about. And anytime you're in open discussion, there are folks in the audience, doesn't have anything to do with our intellect. I know what the word transaction means, but I didn't have a clue.
I'm sorry.
I do have a concern, and I may be misunderstanding, but it appears to me that in the budget process, which is gonna be starting relatively soon,
3 weeks.
that information does come to the board, that there is information that indicates these are the things we hope to do, and therefore we're trying to set up a budget. That budget is indeed aligned with your strategic plan, but it is, I think, at that time that the board says, oh, you know, and asks its questions, et cetera, such that when a request for proposal has gone out and something comes back to the board 6 months from now, you don't have to go through redlining everything, because you know that it has been budgeted, it is appropriate for the plan that was discussed in February, March, and is that what you're getting at?
Yes, I'm saying that's not happening now, and I'm saying we need.
Well, wait one second. Here's one thing for me to say, as an outsider.
Let's get clarity.
As an outsider, some of you came on the board in January of 2013. Others came on in March of 2013. There may be some out of syncness as far as the budget process is concerned, simply because of when you came on as a board. But theoretically, for boards, it is during that budget process where you have workshops and you have open hearings, et cetera, that I think exactly what Ms. Mayfield is suggesting will take place. Now, the superintendent needs to weigh in on this and help me to know if I'm off base.
No, I don't really understand the comment.
Okay.
Because what you described is exactly what happens.
Then you've answered the question.
And see, I never see the initiative until I see the blue sheet.
But I know, but when you adopt the budget, which is what boards do, right? When you adopt the budget, you are authorizing your one employee to implement it.
That part I understand. I'm saying that the components that make up that decision are presented to us subsequent to us passing the budget. And I'm saying we spend a lot of time evaluating the merits of the decision to do this thing, in addition to whether or not these are the dollars that need to be spent. When you look at the questions that I here coming from, not only from myself, but from other board members, about should we do this?
Right.
And I'm saying the decision to do this apparently has been made at least 3 months, 90 days prior to that because of the RFP process.
No, the decision to do it is made when you all authorize and adopt the budget.
And that's what everybody needs to understand. That is the whole
That's the
purpose.
decision to do it, and for instance, if the board, for whatever reason, did not want to implement or finance this initiative,
Mhm.
then it's up to the board through their power and authority not to fund it.
So you're saying, you're assuming that we know that when we get a blue sheet,
No, that's, I'm talking, we're getting ready to go through a budget process right now. And only the board can adopt the budget. Now, I can't do it, no one else but the men and women sitting at this table has the
Understood.
authority to do it.
right,
All right, once that's done, I am authorized or empowered by the board to carry out the directives of that budget.
right, and I guess the point that I'm communicating, which is where the disconnect may be, is that we get subsequent transactions on a monthly basis that are designed to expend that budget.
Correct.
Right. And I'm saying the definition of those requests I don't see the definition of what's going to be done until I get
Just
the
a point of clarity, I was gonna jump in there also. I think everybody's comments are very valid. I think, in my opinion, what I perceive, what I hear from Mr. Mayfield is something, a suggestion for our budget development for this upcoming year, to where if there's a pool of money that is being requested by the administration, that not only do we hear, I need $73 million for X, Y, or Z, but to go ahead and tell us what we're gonna spend it on.
Right.
In preparation of it, so I'm sorry.
Right, or just for the purpose of clarification, I'm saying as earlier in the process as we can, I'm saying at a minimum, there is a 90-day cycle between the decision that is going to be made to spend these dollars on a particular item and when we actually see it. There's a 90-day period that is expended. And I'm saying it would seem to me that the information about the merits of that decision could be presented after the decision is made as opposed to waiting until the transaction is complete.
But then you get into, I'm sorry.
Okay, let me just say that what I'm hearing,
Otherwise, it just becomes,
what I'm hearing, wait, I'm hearing you digging in too deep, and let me explain where I'm coming from. From my perspective, and remember I'm an outsider, but it is during the budget process that you get generic information. You don't need to know about every nickel and dime that is being spent.
Right.
And what happens is that if that budget process goes through appropriately and is completed, let's say, mid-April, when you get a request in August, an RFP, that is something, unless the superintendent highlights it, red flag, that is something that has been approved theoretically already in the budget process. It is just that you are getting a sense of the exact dollar amount that is being spent here, but it came out of what was discussed months ago. And so, you don't want to get into the weeds of everything that's going on, what the rationale is for, because you've already done that.
but I'm saying to that point, we've had items that have come to that point and been rejected. So if the assumption is true, if it has been pre-approved by virtue of the budget-making process, then they should all be approved. Why
No,
not?
because hypothetically, we could recommend something that was outside the scope and parameters of what you automatically approve. You're the check and balance to make sure that with fidelity, we carry out the directive.
And let me throw in something else, because I don't know if I did this with this group. But when you are dealing with budgetary items, you should be asking, was this budgeted? How much did we spend in this arena last year? Is this in keeping with what we had planned? If not, why? And how is it going to impact another area? For example, we've suddenly got to make some great expenditures as far as furnaces are concerned. Okay, if we do that, is that going to impact our ability to put gas in the buses? Those are the generic questions you would ask, rather than, should this be $3,028.13 as opposed to something else?
Correct.
So, all of that, however, unless something has occurred, is still in keeping with your budgetary item. But if you see something and it just does not sit well, we're gonna buy a $5 million bus because it is, you know, it's got rose-colored glass. That's the time to ask the question. And I am being facetious, but that's the only way I do it.
That's a school board bus.
And let me add one more thing, and if in fact the budget that you authorize is not carried out a way that achieves certain metrics, then I am responsible for that. And if I fail, you fire me.
I get that part.
I think that's, right, that's
And
how
let
it
me
works.
ask one other thing. I think that what we're doing right now is, there needs to be some offline discussion to make sure that there is clarification, because I think that most of the board is comfortable with, moving beyond this, but what I do wanna caution is that horrific M word.
Don't say it. Don't say it.
Say it. I'm gonna say it.
Ryan,
Micromanagement. We gotta be careful. We don't mean to do that. But that's exactly what happened. Now, we've been there, done that, so we're not going there again. Is everybody clear? Because see, the other thing is, I'm not gonna walk out of here today and have anything occur in this room that we've covered and discussed, because it'll be personally embarrassing. Everybody with that? Okay. Sir, because I gotta come back to you.
Yeah, one thing I want to add, for instance, talking about an RFP or RFQ, as a superintendent, I don't engage in that. But let me tell you what happened. You become the subject of lobbying by vendors.
Yeah, and I'm not.
I know, let me finish, let me finish. I don't engage at that level to protect my integrity in the process. That is done by professionals who are disinterested. I would put myself and you would put yourself in a very precarious position if in fact these contractors and others recognize or realize that they might be able to influence the process at a level where we should not be involved.
Okay, may I call on Dr. Carter? And you all need to have more conversations.
I know,
Can I just make one comment?
One, very
Just
brief.
one. But that's why we invite all board members to agenda setting. We invite all board members to agenda setting for that purpose.
But can I have more than 5 at any given time?
Oh, yeah.
Board members are invited to all be in attendance at the same time.
right, first come, first served.
That's right. If we met the number,
Because that
You're
agenda
out.
setting, I mean, all questions can be addressed in expanded format. If any, Mr. Orson is one, chair and the vice chair mandated, Mr. Orson volunteered to come. So there's always an opportunity to answer questions of great detail that you suggest at agenda setting.
And to help the staff anticipate some questions.
That might occur at the business meeting or the work session.
Okay, Dr. Carter.
Point of privilege, a little story. I used to be the attorney for computer services for the entire state of Ohio. The controlling board approves the completed transaction. They never get involved on the front end. Once budgets were set by departments based on goals and objectives that were approved from their elected official position, then it was left to staff to do that work. And once that work was done and they were prepared, that department came in front of the controlling board, legal counsel had been consulted, all the questions that Dr. Bowie asked were answered, they were presented, and we moved forward. If we indulge ourselves in the details of the transactions as opposed to the question of vision, does this specific transaction meet that goal and vision? We get lobbied, we get censured, we get fired. And we get that lovely call from the ethics department in that state because some citizen has indeed processed this and says, I think that's an ethics violation for these reasons. So we simply must be mindful. The transaction should reflect the goals and objectives that we've approved and are attached to the budget. When they come before us, it's because that's the prudent business decision for how to achieve that. That's what we hire them to do, that's what we pay them to do, and that's what we're going to measure. When they fail to do it, we fire them. When they do it well, we thank them and we reward them with a paycheck because that's their job. Beyond that,
we have ventured into a place where people go to jail. I've watched it happen. I'm not going to participate, nor am I going to allow us to have conversations in such a manner that would put us in that position. Trust me when I say, been there, seen it at that level. So we have to just get some more clarity, I think, about what you're seeking at the level of transactions. I'm not sure that it's necessarily wrong, but I think that there has to be caution and mindfulness because we do get into the weeds, and I've just seen it go so horrifically wrong. Having said that, in the bigger picture of communications, I want to echo Dr. Morley's point. We come from different cultural experiences. I will be quite honest with you. I came from a very focused and business-oriented philosophy where you show up, you drop your bag, you do your job. Joe Blow goes by, he says hey or she says hey. They may not because they're intentionally ignoring me, but because they've got something else on their mind. I've had to learn here in the South that I need to say hey to all y'all all the time because otherwise y'all is mad at me and I didn't even know that I had offended y'all. Honest to
Killing you with kindness.
killing me with kindness. And then the next thing I get is because I did know is bless your heart. And I'm like, that really means something else with some sign language. You know, so I think that to Dr. Morley's point, I appreciate your perspective and it makes me rethink that when I park my car at the door, I have to shift my mindset that I am here and I am present and that I need to at least check in with my colleagues. How is your day? Not only hi, but how is your day? Because if you're coming from a class where the student blew the exam and you're processing, okay, did I write that exam in a way that was meaningful? You're not here yet. And so it's not just the courtesy of speaking that I think is important for us to be mindful of, but that actual checking in so that we are all at a place of mindfulness that we are collectively going to be attending to this work. I think that that is very valuable. I think that is meaningful. One other quick thought to something that John raised, which is I love the fact that the superintendent responds to all citizen comments. I appreciate that we get a copy of his responses to all citizens' comments, and that helps us begin to think about and understand where we may need to weigh in. So, you know, I think it's important for everybody to understand that, yes, he does respond to all of them. We get that information, and I would like for us to think about how we might also consider those things if they can be categorized into groups like policy or procedure, or it's affecting high schools but not elementary schools, so that as we have that information, it helps us more collectively be mindful. I know emails are horribly inundated. I'm like Joyce, I've got 4. Once a day, at the top of my day and at the end of my day, I check all 4. If you need me, I'm a phone call away. Michael will tell you, Dr. Johnson will tell you. I answer these at midnight because I'm just wired that way. But I can't expect each of you to be wired that way. But I do know that if we need quick responses, we cannot operate like 21st century kids because we're not 21st century kids. A telephone has always worked. It will always work. And somewhere in our lives, we are still addicted to the landline. I got 2. So if you need one, I can lend you one. But my point is, emails create a paper trail to allow you to track where you are in getting the information you need. But if you need something quickly, the courtesy of a phone call is always appreciated. For example, my colleagues who still seem to be pressed about the strategic plan, 2 phones, haven't heard from me yet. 2 emails, haven't heard from me. So, if it's important, if you respect the process, if we respect one another, it's incumbent for us to communicate with one another using the tools that we have. Put a poster on my door if you don't think I'm responding to you. I might be okay with that. But I think it's imperative that we use at least 2 platforms for communications because we do get lost in the weeds of email.
Let me
So
suggest
those are my
something too,
messages.
as you shared that you might want to have some kind of spreadsheet for the 9 board members so that you know who gets what best, because everybody's different. Everybody receives information differently, et cetera. And out of respect for that, not trying to keep up with who gets what, a spreadsheet could be very, very helpful. I've got 4 names to come up, okay? And my suggestion is such that we will not be falling on the table. We will break for lunch after these 4 people have spoken. So, anybody else who raised their hand, yes, okay.
Post-lunch.
Your post-lunch.
That's a good one, you take up all the emails.
Oh, no, he's just gonna email us now since you wouldn't call on him.
I recognize something else, and it's, in education, you have to be so careful. I keep touching my neighbor on his shoulder. Okay,
He likes
it's
it.
not sexual harassment.
You're probably touch your shoulders and elbows, just don't hold his hand.
That's why I
Then
swing
you
this
in
way.
trouble.
Yes.
He likes
I
it.
heard the word lunch, so I'll defer.
It's called.
Yeah, I won't defer. I have a couple of quick things I want to follow up on. I think Dr. Morley maybe raised what I consider the most important thing to come out of the communication. I do think we need to formalize agenda setting and the hurdle that we have for last minute additions. I'm more than willing to ask that Dr. Johnson and Mr. McMahon kind of come up with a version of that we could discuss maybe at the next meeting. But just clarifying that, letting the public know how it works, and in fairness to what Dr. Morley said, setting an extremely high threshold for last minute additions, either from board members or staff. And we can define last minute. I think that means basically a week in advance. The agenda needs to be finalized. And we need to think very long and hard about any, I understand there are emergency things that come up. We have snow, we have things.
Rationale behind it.
The superintendent should be able to do that if he.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And we should also be free to reject something from the agenda if it's a last minute addition, if we don't think that it meets that hurdle.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And I know we can do that. I just want to, I think it's very important that we almost just write out a page of procedures from our supervisors.
There we go.
It says lunch.
You can send that to us.
Sorry, John. We're trying to say meaningful things. We're gonna look at you.
So,
Here, you're hungry,
that's my only recommendation is, I think it's imperative at the next meeting, we just lay that out, discuss it, revise it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a policy, I think it can be something we all agree on. But I'd really love to see that articulated, and we could even post it for the public so they understand the process. The second thing I've heard come up a couple times now is just the processing of citizen comments. One of the negative things I see is the superintendent does a good job of communicating with those citizens. I think some citizens don't understand that we actually do act on many of the suggestions that come up. I would propose as a straw man, we might consider just reserving 20 minutes of every working session to talk about the last meeting citizen comments, where we followed up on previous citizen comments, and where we intend to follow up on citizen comments, just so people understand, the broader public, not just that individual, understand the connection between that session and the way we discuss that process. Because I think that's an important signal to the public that that's not a wasted period of time. The other things I heard that we're going to follow up on formally is procedures on materials prep will be formalized as a superintendent's procedure rather than a policy. Just what we've been doing now, basically, potentially with Mr. McMahon's addition. We're going to include all board members on responses to citizen concerns on a go-forward basis. Even if that gets a little annoying, I do think that's a good policy so everybody knows. And I find that many of the concerns are duplicative. Blue sheets, I would still say need a recommendation. I'll reserve everything else I have to say for the budget discussion. But those were the things I heard us needing to follow up on.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing to this? I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yes.
It was about the public comment discussion. I would say it would be a slippery slope because some things you don't want to air it out in public. Like some personnel issues that people come in front of us about.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Sure.
okay.
I think we can select.
Okay.
And so my first point wasn't about particularly the citizen comments, but the broader category of explanations. And we started at the beginning of doing this a little bit, and then sort of slow. There's are some things and some actions we take that we don't explain. They may, I think they're the right decision, but we don't explain them, in which it might lend itself to an explanation. I'll use an example, the Erie Mitchell settlement. There were some people who look at that as a $7.5 million settlement. But the value to the district is actually probably closer to 12, 13 million. The reason is, we got the first 6 million, the next 5 or 6 million went to the lawyers. So King Spalding may not have gotten their next 5 million, but the outcome wasn't different from the district. And as I've explained this in public in certain cases, and I also, there was more analysis which would included, in any settlement, you do an analysis of probabilities and at what percentage you think you might recover, and then you have to deduct what the projected expenses were. At least for me personally, and I got to a value which I felt very comfortable that the $7.5 million settlement was in line with what was protecting the interests of the school district. But in a vacuum, it could look like we were selling the system out short, and I did not believe
Left 30 million on the table.
Right. In fact, there were explanations of people saying, oh, there were $34 million in damages. The special master said that. That's not what the special master said. Because he only made rulings on questions of law, which said that we proved every element to the full extent. That's the maximum we could recover. Not that it was a finding of fact. So that was a big enough issue. Well, we got to the right resolution. I think there was room for explanation. And I think in some of the things we do, it might behoove us in the same way selectively on citizen comments, that we might take some time to explain how we got to an outcome and not leave it back. First thing. Second thing, on blogs and social media, because this is a conversation that goes back. And there has been a hesitancy in large entities, public and private, to engage in social media. Blogs being one of this. And I remember this discussion some years ago in which some of the leadership of the school system was interested in actually engaging in social media, and the board wouldn't let them. And I think the reality is we are in a social media-driven world. And so if we don't engage in social media engages without our participation. And so we have to adjust our thinking to reflect the realities of the information world in which we operate. Third on the agenda, and I think I generally agree with the comments that have taken place. I think one of the things is we also have to be mindful that the item's not just on the agenda, but the information necessary for consideration of the agenda is before us, because that is one of the disconnects. And I know staff is busy, this is sort of long-term, but sometimes we get stuff so late that we may have seen it as an agenda item, but we really didn't see the substance of the agenda item. And we've had instances where the staff has, I think, appropriate superintendents pulled it off of it. But I think in backing up the process, that has to be, it's not just the agenda item, that's the materials that are necessary to support the agenda. Fourth, on phone calls, and I do get that people operate in different ways. To me, and I come back to the email, that if there's something exigent, that requires it, I do try to pick up the phone. But on the other hand, if there's something in which I'm trying, and this is back to my earlier comment, to engage in a conversation, if I've got to call somebody, it also gives me the burden of interpreting what they said and then explaining it back to everybody else without them speaking in their own voice. And I think that is problematic. So if Mel's a phone person, I've got to take what he said and then I've got to actually understand and make sure I report it, because I'm going back to email because I'm trying to engage in a conversation. Phone calls, it's hard to have you can't have an in-person phone call because then you have a meeting.
May I
So,
butt in for just one
yeah.
second? Might I suggest, and I hear you, and I respect and appreciate that, so please take this in the spirit it's offered. You're right, you are reinterpreting. So perhaps it's that you pick up the phone because you got to get Joyce and you're trying to communicate back out. But you leave it to Joyce to then communicate in email, and you get to, when you get back out, doesn't you say, I've touched bases with Joyce, she has weighed in, she will be forwarding her comments, and that way it isn't a reinterpretation.
But
And
I think
know it's hard.
But I think it's harder, and also the larger the board, the harder it is. Just saying.
Oh, well, take one, take all, you'll be all right.
No, but the problem is if we're trying to engage in a broader conversation, again, it becomes somewhat asymmetrical if you're having.
But it's her
one-on-one
responsibility.
You all are gonna be able to
Right.
work through this. You're not gonna, get everything worked out today.
Right.
But you will find that, for example, if you know that Joyce is not reading emails as thoroughly as other people, just to to email about such and such might get it. You know, so you all will work through that
Right.
as you begin to work with each other more closely. You have one more
Right,
thing?
one last item, which is trying to reconcile, I was getting to the larger, to reconcile the sort of comments versus budget and Thad's comments, which are about detail. I think part of this, and I understand micromanage, but it's also one of those words that, and I don't think this was the intent, but it does get bandied around sometimes as a reason to not engage in the conversation. So part of it, I think, is you have to set expectations in a way that people can reasonably interpret information in front of them and come to a conclusion. So the problem with the broad budgeting process is it is a very general process. It tells us what, in a very broad sense, what our priorities are, but it doesn't give us with any specifics. The problem with the specifics that come before us is that it's not always clear their connection to the broad priorities that we may have decided on. But if you look at our blue sheets, and I think this is a criticism I've had from way before being on the board, is it goes through the exercise of talking about what we are trying to support without there being any support student achievement, supports, you know, an align, you know, it's pro forma. Somebody says, looks at the list and says, what one of these things does it support? And this goes to the conversation I've had about, for example, what are the metrics behind any one of these specific student performance initiatives? What are our expectations of the results? And I put this in the same category that by having a more robust blue sheet that ties us to both the broad goals of the system, but in a meaningful way, not in, oh, we checked it off, hey, we found something on the list. And that we agree on, that, and this is gonna take a process, I don't think we'll do it here today, about what's the kind and detail of information we have to feel comfortable making the level of decision. I think it takes us out of the micromanage or whatever else we wanna call it. It gives us, I think it might increase our comfort, and this is all predates us. I mean, this is gonna be a process to get to that process. But I think our blue sheets are not always sufficient to give us the tools to make the decision that we're called upon. We may be a check and balance, but we may not still have the tools, the necessary information in order to make that. And I think that has been a place where maybe part of it's, to Thad's point, that we can't, I don't know that we can identify it at the budget time, quite frankly, because you and your staff may not know which program is going to be used to implement a specific goal. But finding a way of some connectivity in documents that we get, again, this may be an evolutionary process, might help to assuage Thad and other people's concerns that we don't really know exactly what we're supporting other than the specific item that's before us and its relationship to what we're doing and the broad goals of the system.
May I?
No, wait a minute. Let me get y'all, I'll let you wrap up. Please, Mr. Superintendent, no disrespect.
No, I'm hurt.
Yeah.
No tears on his anniversary. And have tears on his anniversary.
I think what I'm gonna say is gonna help.
Okay, I see.
You know, I would like to first start out by saying, I think that this is most certainly indicative of what we've been talking about as far as communication. And Thad, no disrespect, but I must say that I disagree with you. And you and I had this conversation before, we had it at Christmas, when I was trying to eat my Christmas lunch. And, and I think sometimes we have to step back, you know, as I tell my clients, and stop participating and observe. You know, when I went through group therapy, you couldn't get by unless you actually participated and you had to go through an observation and you had to observe the process. Observe yourself sometimes instead of being with yourself, and that might sound strange, but it can be done. Most certainly, I see that we do a great job, and I think that what's brought to us is brought to us in an elaborate form. I think a lot of what we're talking about is the minutia we get caught up in at every board meeting that takes us forever and a day. We sail the 7 seas. We go through the pyramids. We go here, there, the other, because we want to control. We want to be in the depths of stuff. It don't take all of that. We don't need to be a part of it. I don't want to see every RFP. That's not what a board does. I'm on a national board. We don't go through all this stuff. And hold on a minute. Because I hear the same thing in the board meetings, and I think we get waylaid by this same process. We want to know who came up with the nickel. Was it silver? What did they come up with? How did they put it together? That's why we have this man here. And if he doesn't do it, then we fire him. That's why he has a whole team behind him who are educated, who are smart enough, and if we don't feel that they are, then he needs to do what needs to be done. That comes back to the transparency, it all comes back to trust, and as Dr. Bowie said, I've just felt this whole micromanaging piece, that's not what we're here for. If we want to be superintendent, we need to go ahead and put in our position next year, resume to become superintendent. Or either get rid of him and let's go ahead and run this organization. I've said this over and over. But when we get caught into, we're not supposed to be at RFP. And like Mr. Superintendent said, and Dr. Carter said, is that we get caught up, we're putting ourselves in a very precarious predicament. I don't want to hear who's trying to get a contract, what they're trying to do and all of that, because we're part of swaying whatever's going on. I think we get too in depth, we get too involved in that minutia, we get so in there, we waste a lot of time. We don't see exactly what's going on. The blue sheets, to me, are fine. And as I read through it, I highlight stuff that's on that blue sheet, and if I have a question or anything, I go online. I don't even call up Mr. Thurman and research. I can research for myself. If we're saying that we are assessors and we're researchers, then we should be able to do that. But I go and find out what I need to do if I have any questions and I pose them. But it's enough where it's respectful of the administration. I think too often what we don't do is respect the administration, that these people are bright people. This is why they're in the positions. I don't think the superintendent would have them here if they were not. And I don't think we respect their time. I don't think that we respect what they're for and what they represent because of the fact that we have our own agendas, and we have to be careful of that. Because again, we will go to that micromanaging. We have to know every little detail. When I'm baking a cake, I don't need to know how the flour was made. I just need to know that it's self-rising, it's gonna rise to the occasion. And so I think that we have to begin to look at that, respect this man enough. Because that budget, that whole process, it has been the most explicit for me. I mean, it's simplified. I can read it and understand it. The blue sheets, they give you the history of what they're proposing, what they want the approval for. It gives you what they're actually looking for, what they're asking for. They give you that pass, say it, come back, and then ask for it. What more? Do we want a 50-page referendum that we have to have all the time? We don't have to have all of that. And I think we have to begin to look at efficiency, expediency, but at the same time being thorough and making sure that we're doing the job what we're here to do. We're here to govern. And we're not here to run it, we're not here to tell this man necessarily, although we're his boss, but how to do it. And I think when we can get to that point where we've just got to get out of that microing and allow him to manage and do the things that support him, we have questions to be able to do that. And I think some of the questions when we talk about communication can be left to a phone call to Mr. Thurman, or an email if he wants it. But, you know, that we don't get to the board meeting and we take this stuff and we go on and on and on, that sometimes it dilutes what we're really trying to do. And I think with the public, we don't want to lose them either, you know, when they're part of that. But get those answers. And so I try to get the answers so when I come, I'm aware of what we're looking at. And I'm not, you know, I'm privy to what's being asked for. You know, and I race to the top. You know, I went on and I have other people. I researched my own stuff and made sure when we were voting on that issue, how that money was going to be appropriated. When we're looking at dual accreditation. And so when that came up that day, at that night at the board meeting, someone whispers in my ear, we're going to be voting on this. Hold up, I didn't know anything about voting on this, but I didn't even know it was going to be there. But I had done enough research, talked to people even in other districts, that I was privy enough to know what would be the impact and effect on the DeKalb County school system in the short term and the long term. So I would like to see us give more credence to Mr. Thurman, give more credence to the board, give more credence to Margaret Francois, who has to put all of this stuff together, and that's a whole nother subject, because we really need to look at how we take and utilizing her services, paying her, all those things like that. You know, at the last board meeting, they talked about the administration. All this stuff that's being put on them, and we don't want to pay them, and we don't want to talk about it. I mean, these are people who haven't gotten raises, the teachers, it's counselors in years, and we keep putting more on them. Some of this stuff we need to do ourselves. And I'm not power hungry, and so I think we have to begin to look at, what are we here for? And I'd like to charge each board member with the fact, look at yourself. And I'm willing to look at me and say, you know, what am I here for? Why am I here? And what's my purpose? And am I going too much? Am I trying to take and project my own needs and wants on other people because of the fact that I'm here and they're there? And I think that when we begin to do that, then we can respect what people are doing because of the fact that the budget comes forth, that's what it is, it's a budget. It's a projection, it gives you all of that. We approve it when they come back. We already know what's going on. So we get together, it's almost like it's elementary, it's our first time hearing about it. And I think that we have to be aware of people's time and respect that time. That a board meeting is not supposed to be there to spend the night. You know, we come, you've been there from 2 and then we're still here at 9, and we take an hour or 2 hours to look at one little thing that could have been looked at realistically and say, well, how does it fit? How is it gonna benefit? And is it because I want it and I've got to win this argument? So I'd like to be able to see us do that. But I'm pleased with the process and with the whole thing. I just don't want us, again, caution to go down. That's what SACS doesn't want, is going back down with that other board. And as Dr. Bowie said, they've been there before. I haven't been there, and I'm not going there. But when we start getting too caught up and claustrophobic that we've got to bust out and be able to find all this stuff like that, I think we step out of our lanes. And I'd like to suggest that we, as far as communication and everything that we're doing, that we stay in our lanes and recognize what we're here for, and allow the superintendent, who I think has done a fantastic job, and the board, I think we've done a fantastic job, but we just have got to stop getting caught up into these little nitpicky, fine things that really have nothing to do with what we're here to do.
We have one final speaker, one final comment, Mr. Thurman. Really, and I think that he can
No,
wrap
I was
this.
mesmerized. I move we go to lunch. Well, I think Dr. Moore has laid it out. Now, I think really, looking at it from where I am, and, you know, I'm a superintendent, but you always have to know where you are in the process, right? And when I hear comments about achievement, academic achievement, and performance, that gets counted. As a matter of fact, it's going to be counted in April. In the CRCT test and graduation rate. That's the only time you will really know. You can't know it in the growth with those tests, and we're getting ready right now. We're focusing, our principals, our teachers, getting ready for those high stakes tests that are going to occur in the first week in April, and then ultimately at graduation. What you all can help us do, and what I'm trying to do at the central office level, is put a no-fly zone over our schools and let our principals and our teachers and the support staff at the central office help them be successful. That's how school districts are rated, aren't they?
Yep.
How you perform on the test, what's your graduation rate. All this, everything else is just details that don't really matter at a high level. This is the first year we'll get a chance to be graded. I can't know it till you know it. And what you hired me to do, and the 14,000 other people, is to proof in the pudding, right?
Make it happen.
Make it happen. And that's the goal. And if we don't make it happen, you change the superintendent, right? And find somebody better qualified, more focused, brighter, more creative. That's what you should do.
Or make sure you had the right goal.
Or the right resources aligned with the right goals. And so now we will have that opportunity. I'm looking forward to it, because that's the test. That's the test. And see, what we have to do in the interim is to give us the opportunity to succeed. The biggest challenge I see sometimes, to be, and just being in favor, is that it appears as if some of the things that are being requested are really creating more obstacles than problems. I'll just be honest with you. And that's the word from staff.
Okay.
And the questions are being asked and answered, but then we never hear any other information. It never has any impact. So it comes to look like it's busy work. Right? Because if a staff member spend 10 hours working on something, and I get it, but then if it never ever manifests itself in any discussion at the next meeting, we get 10 more questions,
Right.
and then they are answered, and we never hear again, and it's 10 more.
Why not do all that work?
Why are we doing all this work?
And it's taking time.
And it's taking time, and it's consistent, and it's been that way meeting after meeting after meeting. And so at that point, you're creating a very negative environment which I would suggest, because we know now, no matter what public says, there have been major cuts throughout the history. And if you really want us to do better academically and with graduation rates, and you hired me to do the job, then you have to trust me to do it at least this 12 months. And if you don't succeed, you are obligated to change leaders. If you don't, then you have not fulfilled your responsibility. Is that fair?
It
And
is.
that's just not me, and that's what the ones that are gonna come after me.
Everybody wants to.
Right.
do more
No, 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 my only comment, I guess, is, because a lot of this, I think, is in response to some things that I've made, and then we'll take up this after lunch. I think I've done a gross injustice to communicating what my concerns are. What I would like to do while we do lunch is to diagram what I'm talking about, because it's not, the responses that I'm hearing have nothing to do with what I'm saying, and I'm saying there is more than this disconnect between the information that I'm asking for. I'm not communicating well now with what I'm asking, because I'm hearing the responses.
We'll
I'm
let you
saying,
do the diagram.
yeah.
And how long are we gonna take?
We
for lunch?
recess,
6 minutes.
Oh, about 3 hours.
Yeah.
let's take 30 minutes.
I'm leaving it.
Oh, okay.
I'm leaving it.